From Vermont Public, this is The Frequency. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. It's Thursday, February 6th, and here are today's headlines. Vermont officials are working to understand the impact of potential tariffs on Canadian energy imports. President Trump announced a 10% tariff earlier this week and then paused it for 30 days. Roughly 30% of Vermont's gasoline, propane, fuel oil, and kerosene comes from Canada, according to the Vermont Fuel Dealers Association. That number is higher in northern Vermont. Matt Cota is with the fuel dealers.
The industry that brings fuel into Vermont, sells it to consumers, is certainly nimble enough to adapt. But this was a welcome pause. We certainly hope it doesn't come back in 30 days.
Cota says if a 10% tariff does go into effect, it would raise gas and heating fuel prices by about 25 cents per gallon. He says customers would see price impacts almost immediately. Bennington residents received an update this week on new PFAS contamination in the area. The new sites were confirmed through a series of tests conducted on around 130 wells in Bennington and 24 wells in southern Shaftesbury last year, as reported by the Brattleboro Reformer. The sites are located outside the original, quote, zone of concern the state designated about a decade ago. The town is pursuing state funding to extend its water line to as many affected properties as possible. The project is estimated to cost around $13 million, but town officials say federal funding withdrawals from the Trump administration could affect their ability to finish the project. If it seems like a lot of your friends and family are sick right now, you're not wrong. Almost 9% of emergency room and urgent care visits in Vermont last month were due to flu-like illnesses. That's according to data from the Department of Health. Those rates are high compared to this time last year, but they're not out of the ordinary. Dr. William Raska is a professor of pediatric infectious disease at the University of Vermont Medical Center. He says a lot of his patients are coming in with the flu.
The typical thing pre-pandemic and now starting to become more again is that we see this burst of activity over a short period of time, similar to what we're seeing right now.
Raska says rates of flu-like illnesses might be a little higher this year because of COVID, which has similar symptoms and is also circulating. Public health officials say it's not too late to get your flu vaccine. They recommend washing your hands regularly with soap and water and avoiding contact with people who are sick. A Lamoille County nonprofit that redistributes surplus produce from local farms will get a new food processing hub. The facility will go inside the old Walgreens building in Morrisville, and it will expand the work that Salvation Farms already does. The nonprofit buys excess potatoes, beets, zucchini, and carrots from farmers and then processes them for local entities to buy. Kelly Dolan is Salvation Farms Executive Director.
And our focus is on those institutions that traditionally haven't been able to afford local food. So that includes schools, local prisons that just have been priced out of the market. And so we're trying to facilitate access for individuals that otherwise perhaps wouldn't be able to have this local food.
Dolan says construction for the food processing hub is expected to begin in the spring, and she hopes it will launch in late summer. The project is funded with a grant from the Agency of Agriculture and a federal award from the Northern Border Regional Commission. Coming up, Liam Elder Connors has the story of a man he got to know from reporting about Vermont's prison population during the COVID pandemic. He was also one of the more than 80 Vermonters identified as homeless who passed away over the last several years. The second installment of a collaborative series with 7 Days is just ahead after this.
Thanks for listening to The Frequency, where support comes from VITA, supporting business growth and innovation in the Green Mountain State. From agriculture to manufacturing, energy to food production, find solutions that turn your business dreams into reality. Visit VEDA.org and see how VITA can help make it happen.
Homeless Vermonters face many deadly risks, but the state doesn't track how many have died or what kills them. A first-of-its-kind analysis by Vermont Public and 7 Days identified at least 82 people who died either living outside or sheltered in motels between 2021 and 2024. Many of those deaths happened in largely invisible ways, in tents, sheds, motel rooms, and dumpsters. This week, we're bringing you 3 of their stories. In this second story, Vermont Public's Liam Elder Connors reports on the death of a man he knew.
Our reporting found the majority of homeless deaths in Vermont were fatal drug overdoses. Among these dozens of people was a man I knew, Todd Gorton.
Hello, this is a prepaid call from Todd Gorton. an inmate at the Northern State Correctional Facility.
I first met Gorton in 2021 while I was writing about how prisons were responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. Vermont was the only state in the country where no prisoners had died from COVID, thanks in part to aggressive lockdowns when the virus was detected. Gorton told me these lockdowns were tough. Once, he and his bunkmate were confined to their 8-foot by 12-foot cell for 49 days.
My anxiety is through the roof. I'm the best basket case you'll ever run into.
Over the course of 3 months, by phone and email, Gorton told me about his life. He had spent most of it in prison, starting when he was 16. He was charged as an adult with attempted sexual assault and spent 3 years incarcerated. He did another 18 years after a 1990 conviction for sex crimes involving a child. When we talked in 2021, Gorton was close to finishing a 12-year sentence for burglary, but he was worried about finding a place to live.
I have no rental history. I've never had a license. I've never even had a credit card. I've never had nothing. You know what I mean? Nothing but jail. I don't think I ever had. I can't believe I made it this long.
Still, Gorton had some hope. He worked in the prison's wood shop and liked it. He thought maybe he could work in carpentry when he got out. I wish I could show you what I'm making, he told me once. He was studying to get his commercial trucking license. At one point, he told me a friend found him an old Toyota camper he could live in, but he knew whatever he did, some structure would help. Often in times of stress, he turned to drugs.
My problem is, though, every time I get out, I think it's my birthday, and it's not like that. I really got to do something with my life.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Well, I guess I got to go.
Yeah. I'm glad A year later, in May 2022, Gorton got out of prison. I lost track of him until last January when I ran into him at the Burlington Criminal Courthouse. The 54-year-old had picked up some retail theft charges. He'd been homeless and using drugs, but he told me things were looking up. He was on Suboxone, and he'd recently got into the Burlington Housing Pods, a shelter intended as a first step for people exiting homelessness. I gave him my card, and he said he'd call. Less than 2 weeks later, Gorton overdosed and died inside his 60-square-foot pod. For Vermont Public, I'm Liam Elder Connors.
This story was co-reported by 7 Days staff writer Derek Brower. You can read the story at vermontpublic.org, at 7daysvt.com, or in this week's print edition of 7 Days. Thanks for listening to The Frequency today. We had additional reporting from Abigail Giles, Adia Golston, Lexi Krupp, and Elodie Reed. Our executive producer is Kevin Trevelyan, and our music is by Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Each morning, it's a new opportunity, a chance to start fresh. Up First from NPR makes each morning an opportunity to learn and to understand. Choose to join the world every morning with Up First, a podcast that hands you everything going on across the globe and down the street, all in 15 minutes or less. Start your day informed and anew with Up First by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts.